In the late 1800s, the United States had just been through the terrible Civil War. The country was still getting used to being the moral and just place it wanted to be. Soon, though, opium and the places where people used it, called opium dens, became a new enemy. Most of us know more about the war on drugs today, but you might be shocked to learn that many of the same social problems existed in the late 1880s. However, these worries were mostly about Chinese newcomers and the opium habit they brought to the US. These 48 pictures, which were taken in opium dens around the world in the 1800s and early 1900s, make you feel like you're really there. Before the Great War and standardization of color photos, there were opium dens all over China, the US, and many other places in the world. Chinese migration and new opium dens. In the 1850s, a large group of Chinese people came to the United States for the first time. Thousands of Chinese people left their home countries because of the bad economies there and came to the land of chance, where they did everything they could to make their lives better. Some people came to California during the gold rush, while others stayed to work on the train. Some even went into business for themselves. Opium houses, which were places where the drug could be bought and smoked, were a strange way for this last group to make money. In the United States, opium was a completely new drug, but it quickly became popular in China. At first, only Chinese people used opium. Some Chinese immigrants who came to the US in the 1840s and 1850s brought the poison with them, but it became famous very quickly, even among the most reputable people in America. The Daily Mail says that these smart new citizens quickly took advantage of the fact that opium was allowed in the US. 5 ounces of the drug cost about $8, and it was easy to find in San Francisco and California, even after those states' governments banned it in 1878 and 1881. The first real crackdown on drugs in the United States was caused by the rise in popularity of Chinese opium shops. These places gave opium users the space they needed to enjoy their new drug properly, with comfortable bunk beds, helpful staff, and a generally nice lounge vibe. These opium dens didn't just sell the drug, they also made sure their customers had everything they needed to smoke it, like standard pipes, bases that looked like hookahs, and different kinds of tins. It's not surprising that the first opium dens in the United States opened in San Francisco's growing Chinatown neighborhood, since that's where most Chinese immigrants went at the time. During the temperance movement, Americans were afraid to drink alcohol often for fear of its bad effects on health and society. Opium dens seemed like a very appealing choice at that time. In 1882, an undercover writer for The Examiner in San Francisco went to a local opium den to look into it. She was shocked by how common and everyday the drug had become. What made her even more shocked was that the drug users she met had very high-class families. 2 white girls, neither of whom were over 17 years of age, dressed in clothes usually reserved for a Sunday picnic, she wrote. The experience made her realize just how commonplace the new drug had become. America's first war on drugs. In the 1850s, a large group of Chinese people came to the United States for the first time. Thousands of Chinese people left their home countries because of the bad economies there and came to the land of chance, where they did everything they could to make their lives better. It was during the 1880s and 1890s that the usage of opium in the United States reached its highest point, which resulted in a significant amount of condemnation from both worried American families and politicians. One of the outcomes was the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which not only made it illegal for Chinese laborers to immigrate to the United States, but also barred the importation of any and all opium. Next, there was the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, which made it more difficult to enable drugs and remedies like opium to enter the country. This piece of legislation was passed in 1906. The Food and Drug Administration, FDA, was established as a direct result of the act, which served as a direct precedent for its establishment. Under the administration of Theodore Roosevelt, the federal government, which was aware of the hazards posed by opium and other drugs, mandated that any substances that were deemed to be dangerous or addictive be labeled as such. It did not appear to make a difference that opium dens had been made illegal by the 20th century, because the unlawful use of opium was still very much prevalent in Chinatowns located on both coasts of the United States. On the other hand, on February 9, 1909, Congress approved the Smoking Opium Exclusion Act, which not only prohibited the importation of opium, but also prohibited its possession and usage. However, it is interesting to note that this ban was only applicable to the Chinese opium that was manufactured for smoking purposes, and not to the therapeutic opium that was becoming increasingly popular among wealthy white Americans. That being said, this piece of legislation might be interpreted not only as a means of combating a novel and unusual medication, but also as a statement of anti-Chinese feeling in the United States. In point of fact, throughout these years, the concept that Chinese men were manipulating the nation's naive white women into drinking harmful drugs in dingy, gloomy dens was a prevalent one. The persistence of opium and other drugs. Despite the ongoing war on opium dens and the Chinese who were believed to enable this, the drug continued to be used across early 20th century United States. Indeed, a substantial portion of Americans in major cities such as New Orleans, Chicago, St. Louis, and New York recreationally smoked opium on a regular basis. It is true that a sizable proportion of people living in large cities in the United States, such as New Orleans, Chicago, St. Louis, and New York, regularly engage in the practice of smoking opium for recreational purposes. Opium dens were frequently frequented by both men and women from the highest echelons of American society, in contrast to the crack epidemic that occurred in the 1980s or the resurgence of heroin that occurred in the decade that followed. Individuals from the high and middle classes would frequently visit a den in order to engage in a session of blissful numbness and quiet. This was not at all unusual. Opium was obviously still being sold and used, despite the fact that there was a lot of new restrictions. The opium industry continued to thrive even after the earthquake that occurred in San Francisco in 1906, and the ensuing fire that followed it destroyed the majority of the city's opium facilities. This prompted the United States government to engage in even more extensive raids and arrests than they had previously done. On the other hand, the laws did have the effect of putting the trade of the material into the hands of criminal elements, which is quite similar to the situation that exists with the present war on drugs. In addition, they encouraged the use of newer, more potent narcotics such as morphine and cocaine, which circumvented the rules and prohibitions that were in place. This made the situation even more dire. Not only did the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act prohibit the use of morphine and cocaine for non-medical purposes, but it also prohibited the use of opium. This legislation was passed in 1914 by the United States government. Over the course of the subsequent decades, additional substances, notably the ever-popular cannabis plant, were added to the list of substances that were illegal, so laying the groundwork for the contemporary war on drugs. The decline of opium dens. Ultimately, it was not so much the passage of legislation as it was shifts in culture that brought about the decline in the popularity of opium. By the time World War II was on the horizon, the number of people who frequented dens and consumed the substance in general had decreased across the country. With the exception of one particular opium den located at 295 Broome Street in Manhattan, which remained operational until 1957, this was an exceptional circumstance. This Orient vice, which was considered exotic, had been abandoned by the United States of America and the rest of the Western world. The United States of America had now been deeply ingrained in social circles and establishments that dealt in alcoholic beverages, beer, and cigarettes. Currently, the only things we have are old images and a limited number of first-hand stories of what it was like to sit in a plain lair in the Chinatowns of the United States and allow the opium to take hold. However, it is possible that this is for the best. We hope you liked this video. Watch another video here.